as you can see, we're not pausing even for a minute. We're going to go straight into our next panel, which should be absolutely fascinating as well. It's a little bit more technical, a little bit more involving some two quite technical words, especially for me. We're going to be talking about blockchain. We're going to be talking about metaverse. It is something completely different. We are going to turn and look at, actually what happens, for example, when a country completely embraces the metaverse in building a better economy. It's a big topic of conversation. It's something that is making headlines here in the kingdom and also in the wider region because, of course, people are considering the different layers of the metaverse. Let's find out a little bit more about this topic. Let's get into the details of it with my panel of three eminent guests. And I have to say, we are truly honored to have these three individuals join me here on the stage. They're extraordinary speakers. They're extraordinary experience in their field. And I'm just meeting them myself. Thank you very much indeed.
Yes.
Thank you for joining.
Hello.
Really lovely to have
Georgia.
all three of you join us. Have a seat. Let me introduce you to our audience. Yatsui is a legend in his field, literally. Entrepreneur, angel investor, currently the co-founder and executive chairman of Animoca Brands, global leader, of course, in blockchain and gaming. Also the founder and CEO of Outblaze, a tech conglomerate specializing in cloud, gaming, and smartphone software. Often when I introduce people, I feel like it's sort of unnecessary because everyone knows who you are already, but I'll go into it.
Thank you so much.
Nevertheless, good to have you with us. Sébastien Bourget, thank you for coming on. Co-founder and COO of the Sandbox Metaverse. Of course, virtual world where players can play, own, govern, monetize their experiences using NFTs and Sand, which is the main utility token of the platform. I'm sure many of you have been on it and enjoyed the experience. And also welcome to the stage, global game publishing expert, Alexander Yarotyunyan.
Alex.
I just didn't get it right, did I? I'm so sorry. The co-founder of Creta, the Web3 entertainment company focusing on developing and publishing video games with sustainable blockchain, an absolutely fascinating field and one we're going to learn a lot more about in the next
Absolutely.
few
Thank you
minutes.
very much for having me here.
It's a pleasure to have all three of you on stage. Thank you very much for joining me. It is hugely exciting. And this does feel like one of those sort of Alice through the looking glass moments where I feel like once we've heard you all speak, we're going to emerge the other side, and I don't think we'll look at the world of gaming or indeed the world in the same way. So no pressure, but I feel like that might be where we're slightly heading now. Sébastien, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay, because I want to talk about the connection between governments and metaverse platforms. And of course, that's something that you can in particular speak to. How do you envision the collaboration between those two entities evolving over the next decade?
So maybe first, let me explain what's the metaverse to everyone.
To me too.
The definition. Great. Yeah. So we really see the metaverse as this myriad of virtual world where you as a user can use an avatar, a 3D character that becomes your digital identity to access any of those worlds and platforms in a very seamless manner. So you're not locked in one platform only. Your identity and all your digital assets, the content you created, the content you earn as you played, even your virtual land, your virtual house, all of that, you can transfer it across all different worlds and even sell it on marketplaces, monetize it as you want. We at the Sandbox have built an open metaverse platform which includes a map of 164 lands. A land is a piece of virtual real estate where you publish an experience. And we've been onboarding more than 400 brands from many regions of the world. And also, those brands touch around entertainment, around music, sport, gaming, culture, media, and also public entity, institution, and governments. Recently, at LEAP, we announced that the DGA, for example, entered the Sandbox, acquired a land, and they are using it actually to first learn about the metaverse, how it's being used, participate in it, and then from there build the guidelines, the playbook that will serve to educate the rest of government entities. So that's the first step, and through education, training, hackathon, etc. I think it's important that government, public sector are also stepping in because they provide the level of trust and a signal toward like the industry and the private sector that it's a new technology that you can onboard, you can approach, you can start using for yourself, and we will embrace it as well because we believe in like building the future of digital economy, and we want to leverage for both public and private sector that technology in a new way. So that's one of the big way, and Saudi Arabia is definitely walking into that direction.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment it feels like the Wild West. You know, a sort of invisible world from the outside. Of course, once you step into it, there's so many visuals. But
that's why you need education. Like, of course, like until you create your avatar as a first step, you can have so much different ideas of what the metaverse is. Like, some people think it's just like wearing a VR headset to enter a virtual world. Some others think like this is only Web3 or NFTs. No, like the metaverse is really like this multitude of virtual world that can exist across multiple platforms. And the first step to get familiar with it is create an avatar, start exploring. There is already over 150 experiences live in Sandbox and more to come. And see how like it inspires you to create that new virtual world, develop new use case, educate audiences about it, and step by step, like make it more mainstream and accessible.
Maybe I'll just add to this, which is that if you think about where does the youth want to hang out, right? They're already kind of hanging out in a pre-metaverse type of experience, which is basically online games, right? Basically, even the time you spend online. I think Saudi is, the 12th most active country that is sort of the users in Saudi are number 12 in terms of most active online at over 8 hours a day, right? Which, if you think about it, is more than probably the average of their waking hours, right? They're spending a lot of time online. And that means that their headspace and where they are thinking is already in the metaverse. But the issue, and which is different what Sandbox is doing versus what the current version of the metaverse is, which you might see from other companies or game companies, is that they don't own any of their time and their space in this one, right? So the promise of the Web3 version of the metaverse is that actually they have true digital ownership. They have ownership of the assets and therefore also have digital sovereignty. I'll give you a good example. When Elon Musk acquired Twitter and renamed it to X, the person who used to own the @X handle lost it. It was just taken away from him because there was the branding of the company. And then the other person that used to own the @Music handle, because X decided to go into the music business, just took that as well, right? Now, that's a physical equivalent of someone just saying, you used to own this land, you were developing it for 15 years, I'll just take it. That's the world of Web 2 that we live in today. So in the same way that when you're buying land in Sandbox, now you own that, it's actually not that different than a domain name, or basically your handle. You have 1 million followers on Instagram, do you actually think you own that? Not really. Facebook can remove it at any time, which they did. When Facebook renamed itself to Meta, the person who used to own the @Metaverse handle lost the handle temporarily as well for impersonating an entity that was just created. So this is kind of the world that we live in today. So in Web3, I think it makes sense for government agencies to enter the space because that's where the youth is spending their time. They're online. So in the virtual space, you don't have to create spaces where you want the youth to go to. That's kind of the old way of saying it. Always set up a center, let's get the youth to come here. But actually, in the metaverse, you go where the youth is, right? Which is already online, and it's actually cheaper to do that. You don't have to physically set up some space. So you know already they're playing there. So basically build the experience there, engage with them, and that's one way I think where you create more community because you can go where they are as opposed to make them go to where you are.
Alex, you're building in that space, so and we're going to need to talk about blockchain at some stage as a sort of protection of your IP, effectively. Talk me through to what extent you're already building in that Web3 space.
Sure. So basically, your previous question was about Sandbox. Unfortunately, I'm not involved, but I adore what my colleagues are doing with Sandbox. I think Sandbox has been a pioneer of paving the way how the metaverse should look like in the years to come, right? And we have very similar approaches. We were discussing before this event with the OGs. We do the same. So the core idea of the metaverse is the decentralization, whereas nobody can take anything from you. And the decisions are made on a consensus basis. So basically, it should be built to last. Nobody can force anything unless that's a willingness of the majority, right? So we are within our metaverse again in the same principles, and I think we're struggling with the same problems metaverse got a bit negative tone recently because there were a lot of unfair products around, and with the traditional gamers, it's more associated with some scams or not real products. That's what we should outcome with providing with valuable, sustainable solutions to the gamers. And the first stage is to educate the gamers and general populace to start to step by step use the valuable solutions which blockchain can provide.
So less a Wild West and more a potential utopia, one might argue, because you can protect.
Absolutely, that's a good term actually, because the decentralized world could be utopia, and the opposite is dystopia, when the big tech owns all your data information and then kind of knows you better than you yourself. And
we are currently in a metaverse dystopia. So the answer to that dystopia is actually a Web3 version, because the community, as in the users of the metaverse, own a stake in it and have governance over it.
You cannot build like a true digital economy and support the growth of a country which like more than half of the population is like youth on the basis of like the platform that you don't control. The country can take away the value that your citizens bring by creating and spending time. Saudi Arabia is spending an enormous amount of money and effort to push for e-sport, e-gaming, etc. But this is only one part, one small piece of what gaming in general represents. Like there's a lot of skills involved in gaming toward like socialization, exploration, education, creation as well. And I think like the countries that understand that establishing true digital ownership as a basis of, as a framework, potentially a legal framework behind, will become very attractive over the next decade, because that's what this new generation that Gen Z is looking for. Like more than 75% of them wants to be creator. Many of them dream of like earning a revenue from their activity online, and that can actually be recognized. And I think this region can play an important role about that. Okay,
so say you've got governments around the world and they've made this decision to take your advice, that they need to go ahead and they need to not control this, but they need to facilitate this scenario. How? How?
Well, I think the very first step that governments could do is actually recognize that digital assets are actual property.
Okay.
And that's something that is maybe implied, but one of the problems was that in the past, all the data in, let's say, an existing game, for instance, or on Facebook or something, is actually in a private database. So who is the arbiter of ownership? It's actually a centralized platform. You can't actually prove it. And also, if, for instance, if Google deletes your entry, you're gone. You don't exist, right? And how do you control whether they can do this or not? And that's why blockchain is so powerful, because of its immutable nature. When you start putting something on blockchain, you can actually alter it, which means that even if there is no law technically saying that there is such a thing as digital property, you can at least prove the provenance of it. In other words, if you end up owning a digital asset, whether it's land in Sandbox or maybe some Bitcoin, for instance, you can at least say, well, I used to own this, and here's the proof, and it was in my wallet, and now someone took it, and actually seek for some enforcement around it. Because the very first thing in order to protect something is you have to first be able to prove that you owned it. And that's what blockchain ends up being able to do. Whereas you can't really prove whether you own something in a game. Let's say someone stole your assets in Fortnite and they took your skins. Well, who's going to prove whether you own these assets? You have to go to Epic, and they have to then give you the proof. And maybe they can, maybe they won't. And there's been some court cases around the world. Actually, there's a famous one that happened in China. There's a third-party website that was facilitating the trade of accounts, right? Which happens, right? People were trading accounts. And so Tencent basically tried to shut it down successfully, because they said, actually, the terms of service doesn't allow any of the people to do that, because the assets that the gamer thinks they have is actually not their assets. And there was an outcry in China, because everyone's like, wait, I don't own this? Because, wherever people who play games, who reads the fine print? It basically says...
Nobody reads the fine print.
Nobody reads the fine print. So everyone here who loves playing the games, whether it's Call of Duty, whether it's Fortnite, whether it's Valorant, everything you purchase in your game, you own nothing. You have no rights whatsoever in them. They can take it away, they can ban your account, all your assets are gone. And that's basically what Web3 and blockchain protects. And then when you have that ownership and you can prove the provenance, then you can enforce it if someone took it away, or even, more importantly, the game company takes it away. Let's say, Epic says, we take away your assets. Well, now you have a mechanism to go back to Epic and say, hold on a second, those are my assets. I want them back, right? you may be able to prevent me from playing the game, but you cannot take what is mine. Because at the minimum, I can give it to someone else or sell it to someone else, right? And that's a much better outcome for the end user. It also keeps the game companies who have the absolute power honest. Because now there's a framework in which you can put pressure back to them, which is basically the other aspect of I guess, power and governance that goes to the players as opposed to just with the gaming studio.
And if you allow,
I was going to come to you, Alex. I mean, as a games creator, is this something that you're happy to embrace?
absolutely. So coming from game publishing background, we always had this problem. In the big games, in the big game economies, there's always valuable assets that players want to monetize. Their accounts are very valuable. Their assets are valuable. Sword they built for many years, they want to sell and build something else. Or they are tired of the game, they want to leave, and they spend a lot of money in the game. They want to monetize their experience, right? And it's not possible in the games, but not because we are bad as a game publishers or developers, because there's tons of problems to identify who's the owner, because there's account sharing going on between the clans, between the even family members. And sometimes somebody just sells something just because he wants, but he does not own it. And then they start complaints in the customer support, and it becomes a big problem because you cannot identify who had it in the beginning. They shared it for a long time, and you just don't know what to do, and you just ban it. You cannot allow them to trade because fraud will happen, right? Yeah. So blockchain solve this problem. So instead of having a black market of the goods, you can have a white market of the goods that it's incentivized to play, to earn something, and then monetize it when you're tired.
So we have this system. Have you got examples of countries that have dealt with this, that have created a regulatory environment where it's ordered and it's controlled?
Well, I mean, I thought if you look at, for instance, some places like Hong Kong is moving in that direction.
Okay.
South Korea recently ruled on a number of, I mean, this was a different case. A kid was bullied, I think, into surrendering their assets, and then basically they went to court, and the game studio basically was compelled to return the assets. So it depends on which country you're in.
Yeah.
But the rules are still different per country, and most countries in the world do not have a framework for digital property rights because it's kind of new. But if you start treating digital property in the same way you deal with physical property, then that's when people start to create businesses around it, because now you have certainty. Because that's the other thing what rules do, right? Rules and regulations provide certainty. If I know that this is actual property, then I know I can protect it, which means also I can invest in it because I know I have certainty. You can't invest in something that could be taken away from you at any time, or invest in something that has no clarity. So the regulatory framework becomes very important. And I would say Asia is leading the way. Hong Kong and Japan, both of them have made the metaverse and Web3 part of their national agenda. China has put out a Web3 strategy paper, for instance, citing it as the future of the internet. So you can see where that's going. The US has been the opposite direction, I would say, right? So you've got two different sort of worlds. But I would say, for instance, in this region, obviously UAE, particularly with Dubai, has been quite forward. And even to an extent, Europe has been more progressive on this one, especially places like France and UK.
With Mika.
Yes.
I think you see the importance of the creator economy.
Yes.
Right. So any country that want to position itself for the future and enable and even leverage on top of that creator economy, people who stream over social media, who contribute on YouTube, or people who build in platform like Roblox, Minecraft, Sandbox, Fortnite. We're not talking 100 people, we're talking millions of people already. And certain regions of the world will be able to capture this audience and make sure that they are more attractive, that they are frameworks that are built to really support and attract. In the same way that you want to position your country and make it attractive for entrepreneurs around AI, well, you're going to create a framework that facilitates entrepreneurship, funding, recognition, grants, etc. I think there is a chance, there's an opportunity to start fresh here and not try to build on this legacy, even prehistoric age of digital asset, virtual asset that we were spending for real money but didn't belong to us, and shape the future.
There's some stats.
A big agenda.
Right, and there's some stats to support what property rights do when you actually have the ownership of these assets. So last year, which was obviously a tough market for NFTs, $24 billion of NFTs were sold, which is a big number, right? But of course, in the scale of gaming, it's obviously a little less than 10% of the gaming revenues. But what's important about that $24 billion is not the sum, it's that 90% of that value went to creators and owners of these NFTs. So the majority of the value went to, if it was a gaming economy, went to players and the creators of these assets. That's a huge value shift, which means over $20 billion went to basically the participants of the network, which is still only in the millions of users. One of the largest creator economies in the world, which is Spotify in Web 2, paid only $8 billion to its creators in that same year. Yet they serve hundreds of millions of users and several times millions of more of creators. And we all know that you can't make a living as a musician on Spotify, but you can make a living as an NFT artist or as basically someone sort of making sort of Web3 games. So this is sort of the difference, because in the Web2 environment, you basically don't have property rights, so the asset value is very low. But basically, those places where you have property rights, you can have capital formation, and therefore you have more value to share across, and the value is shared fairly across the ecosystem, which frankly is better for your nation, better for your country.
One easy way to put that is, imagine a country where like you can buy a house, an apartment, you only spend it once, and then afterwards it cannot be resold, and like the value that the country puts into developing the economy, creating job, business, doesn't reflect on this real estate market, and it's all gone. Like that's really the big loss ahead of us in the virtual world and Web3.
The example we sometimes put is that the Web2 world is a little bit like North Korea on the extreme. No property rights, right?
Yeah.
And no capital formation. But of course, the Web3 world is like the developed economies. And basically, you have equivalent higher GDPs and higher income, and also more freedom.
As a publisher, is this exciting or nerve-wracking? It's exciting. Even though the money's not all going to flow to you.
There's another problem here, as mentioned. So basically, in a Web2 world, there are solutions who are bringing together people who have time and less money with the people who don't have time but has some extra money. And there are services where you can hand your account over, and they will kind of train your character while you are at work, and you come back home and it's more trained, you get more experience, etc., etc. So again, if we're trying to bring a disruption, we should solve a real problem, and a real problem is existing, right? There's people who want to do something for money, and there's people who are ready to pay for this, right? And if you have a global platform based on blockchain where you don't have any disputes about the ownership of the account, you can share your account, hire somebody to do some tasks for you, so you kind of get the desired result, and the person is paid, and it's also on a smart contract, so nobody lies to each other.
I think you had the question on the value. I think the thing is that even though the value is actually, maybe as a percentage seems to go less to the publisher, the pie is bigger, right? In the same way that we see in developed economies.
I love how animated this conversation is. Go ahead. No, it's brilliant. Exactly, I love it.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback here on what's been said is like, new business model also create new jobs. Like we're only thinking of like jobs in gaming as like e-sport player, like very competitive, only the top 1% will make it and all the other one will be lost in the mass. But with this approach, with Metaverse, you are also leveraging many different skills and enabling new models for like people to engage in earn revenue. Creator, architect, game designer, fashion designers for avatars, event manager, host, everything around hospitality in virtual world, like renting assets, playing with other people's assets, farming assets, etc. There's a lot of possibilities. We're just really early on tapping on that. But we've seen the power of like decentralized gameplay. And that's the big novelty from before. Before, the economy were designed by the game. They were a closed economy, and you could only have maybe one or two roles, player, and that's it. So,
I think one way to think of it is that in the game, in Web3, every participant, including the player, is now an economic participant, which is not the case in Web2. The only ones that participate in the economics of a game is the investor and the owners of the game, and maybe the studio that publishes it, right? That means the hundreds of millions of people who play games never participate in its benefits. But in Web3, every player is an economic participant, which basically means that you could really onboard an entire population onto, I guess, economic participation through Web3, because everything's an activity, everything is a stake, everything's an ownership. And it doesn't have to be a lot of money, but it means that they now have rights to it.
I mean, that is hugely exciting, and it seems almost ridiculous that I'm going to ask as my sort of final question to all three of you to look to the future, because everything you're saying feels so incredibly futuristic already. But obviously, in this context where we are talking about an economy, we're talking about economic benefits, you can understand why governments feel the need to get involved from a regulatory point of view. And obviously, Sebastian, considering your relationship with the Saudi government now, as we see more governments, such as the Kingdom, exploring the metaverse, what best practices do you think you would recommend they adopt? Big question.
That is a great question. First, don't get it wrong. Like, this sounds futuristic, but this is already happening right now. Like, it's been 12 months roughly that we're seeing in Sandbox over 1 million people played experience already. So it seems small, but it's already becoming significant, specifically in Web3, and we work hard to keep growing. We're seeing various regions of the world entering, embracing this technology, creating cultural neighborhoods. We have Turkey, we have Hong Kong, we have Korea, we have Japan, we have museums from British Museum who entered. Recently, the Kingdom of Bhutan acquired land in Sandbox, developed the Bhutanverse to raise for their youth new creator jobs and opportunity to showcase their heritage, their culture, their history in this virtual world and educate on those possibilities. So that's really what we're looking at first, how we set first experimentation, first example, learn by practice, learn by example, train the trainers, start an ecosystem locally, but reach globally to an audience, things that they cannot have done before on the existing platform, and progressively kickstart that economy until there is a whole industry sector here, for example, in Saudi Arabia, but in other markets that have been traditionally left off and ignored by Web 2 or free-to-play revolution.
Ultimately, Alex, do you predict that the metaverse is going to sort of shape the different ways in which, not just governments, but games developers interact with players, with citizens in the case of their government?
Yep. That's a very interesting, open-ended, difficult question to answer. We can just only think about it. But what I feel is necessary is the government's involvement in the metaverse, because metaverse is not its only entertainment. That's the metaverse to be, right? We're in a very early infancy stage of the metaverse, and we're just still exploring some small bits, training with the gamers, because that's already known mechanics, but it will grow. The metaverse will be some vibrant, big online space we spend a lot of time in, not now, in 10 years and 15 years, so we're just building it brick by brick from now. And in that case, the involvement of government is a must, because there's a lot of regulatory issues there. There's a lot of ownership issues, because I want to highlight this aspect. There's a variety of aspects, but I want to highlight this one. Currently in the games, if somebody steals your account, that's already painful. You're losing, you're angry, obviously. You're losing some financial incentives. You're losing some time you grinded, everything. For the metaverse, it will be even worse, because you're going to have some reputational impact if somebody steals your account. You're going to lose a lot of more financial valuables, which are in your wallet, your NFTs, and there's a variety of aspects of the metaverse. There's educational part, there's private part, there's social part. So if somebody steals your account, he or she has access to your life, and it can really ruin a lot of stuff, your business, your life, etc. So the metaverse should work with the government tightly to enforce some laws, protocols to secure our future digital selves. That's what I want to highlight.
So I would have thought that the existence of the blockchain would help prevent that stealing, that removal. And
that will be, the blockchain will define the ownership. But you still need to have the account, right? You still have the password. You still have some way to identify that it's your physical self linked to your digital self. So here, there's a lot of problems, and people share their accounts. People have their email password as a password. So there's a lot of aspects to this thing. And this is one of the places that the governmental involvement is a must. And there's a lot of other laws, starting from taxation, ending with disputes solving in the digital world.
Can you see any possible pitfalls when it comes to regulation in this sector?
Well, I mean, first, I think the governments do need to get involved because what is the future, generally speaking? It's online, it's virtual. The future of jobs is virtual. So, I mean, it's absolutely in the national interest of every government in the world to do that, not just for tax revenue, but safety, security, to your point. You know, I think blockchain can prove the ownership, but you need enforcement of these laws, right? I mean, you know, the monopoly of essentially enforcement belongs to government. No matter what you do on blockchain, with consensus, you could do some voting, but that's hard, right? At the end of the day, you know, you need someone to enforce it. So I think there's a role for that. I do think, though, that there's some negatives as well. If governments end up over-regulating or basically sort of stifling it, as we see in some other places like the US, it's actually causing the industry to decline. It's causing basically people to retreat from that market, and that's actually what's happening in the US versus other places that are absolutely booming. You go to Hong Kong, you go to Dubai. I just came from Bali, okay? So Bali doesn't seem like a hotspot of places at all. It's a nice place, but it's basically become a major Web3 hub because of all the digital nomads, because they embraced it and opened it. Indonesia has been quite progressive, for instance, as a country to allow sort of, you know, crypto trading and basically embracing Web3 and NFTs. And so now Bali, which is this sort of remote holiday destination, has become a major economic hub, booming in places. So this is really what this is. You want to incentivize the talent, the next generation of developers, the smartest people in the world to come to your place. What do? Create open frameworks that are friendly, that encourage development so they come here and have the certainty that what they're building actually can last for the long term.
Sebastian, do you see that here?
Government should embrace open infrastructure, open framework. They should set a fertile ground for entrepreneurs and the citizens to find jobs into this future of digital economy. They should definitely extend the existing laws, so make sure they apply within virtual world and not make them restrictive, too restrictive, supporting the old business model. It's not because we've been living 20 years, 30 years into a model that is the right model. So it's a good time to embrace the wind of change, think about how technology combined with content can grow an ecosystem, and that ecosystem can prove real impact on the ground for everyone.
Embrace the wind of change. I like that as a final statement. Gentlemen, you slightly blew my mind with this panel. I think it's fair to say I need to go and do a lot more reading to totally understand everything that was going on. But I think you impressed our audience immensely, and I'm hugely grateful for your clear explanations and looking into the future for us. Thank you very much indeed for joining me here on the stage, taking the time to fly to Riyadh and to settle down with us at the Next World Forum. Thank you for your time, gentlemen. I'm sure you want to applaud them as well. Thank you very much indeed.